China and Russia are moving towards strengthening ties through more cooperation. President Xi Jinping met with his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, Saturday in Beijing, and more than 30 deals were signed between the two, covering trade, energy, and the military. Now, the two leaders also signed a bilateral joint statement on strengthening global stability and promoting IT and cyberspace. The visit was Putin's fourth since 2013, when President Xi took office. Xi and Putin had also met just 2 days earlier in Uzbekistan. All right, let's get more on China and Russia's economic ties and strategic partnership with Charles Ortel, Managing Director of 5 Ventures. Charles, good to have you with us again.
Thanks for having me on, Michelle.
So, Charles, as we just said, President Putin meeting with President Xi again this weekend. What would you say was the most significant development from that?
Well, I think it really was an example of a win-win set of agreements with two major powers. From Russia's side, I think they got great agreements for Rosneft and other energy producers, tying in long-term energy supplies to China. And of course, China needs those long-term supplies. And then from China's standpoint, economically, I think there was an agreement announced about a large high-speed train project, which I think would be, again, a win-win for both countries.
Well, certainly an eternal friendship, as President Xi referred to it. And many, including yourself, said that this would happen, that the Western sanctions against Russia would just serve to form a stronger alliance between China and Russia. How do you see this relationship developing and going forward?
Well, I actually do. I welcome it. I think it's a great thing. I mean, if you look at our own country's history, when we put in the interstate highway program, that jump-started the growth rate in this country. Russia, if you fly across it, as I've done occasionally by airplane, there are vast expanses of wilderness with no roads, no train service, no nothing. And so to use Chinese technology and capital and Russian know-how, whatever, to build out the infrastructure across these two countries is a mammoth long-term project where I think both sides can win.
But do you see the relationship developing beyond just economic cooperation? To what level do you see a strategic alliance being formed here?
Well, I think you're right. Vladimir Putin said it recently that America is the only superpower. And for a time that was the case, I would argue, from maybe 91 forward. What's going on now with this rapprochement between China and Russia, in some ways it's going to bring some balance to the world. I think it's a force for good, frankly, but I think it's also a challenge to the West.
Well, speaking of the West, Russia's economy has been hard hit by those Western sanctions imposed on Russia for its actions in Crimea. Now we have the Brexit. So what does the Brexit mean for EU sanctions? We're already seeing a potential softening of the position with Italy's Prime Minister saying, hang on a minute, we're not sure we want to have an automatic renewal of sanctions. Do you think that these sanctions will now be taken away?
I think they're certainly going to be softened. Their impact will be lessened. I think one cannot underestimate the significance of this Brexit. This was a vote to cast aside a ruinous suicide pact for Britain. I think it is going to embolden a lot of countries, a lot of voters around the world. It's going to have an impact here in our country. And I frankly think it's good. I mean, they're casting off a strangulating bureaucracy in Brussels that is, I think, done more harm than good.
Well, you're clearly in the out campaign there, I can tell, but the vote has happened. What does this mean, particularly for Russia's economy? Because the softening of the sanctions, that's a positive, but at the same time, you're going to have oil prices drop further, which would probably hurt Russia's economy even more.
Well, I think, unfortunately, we're all in for a very grievous period. We have inflated a global bubble, and it hasn't worked. It's made the rich a lot richer. It has not promoted investment anywhere. It's created a gigantic bureaucracy. So we're going to have to pay a tough price. Now, Russia is in a better position than most because its external debt is not that high, and they do have these tremendous natural resources. So with the bite of sanctions coming off Russia, that'll be a plus. And then I think the opportunity to reshape the face of Europe and to extend their influence into the Middle East are all good things for them and not so good for the United States.
Well, you know, the focus of these talks was economic cooperation, Charles, but Putin and Xi also agreed to, quote, strengthen global strategic stability. In this time of instability, what does that mean, strengthen global strategic stability? What can we infer from that?
Well, I think, you know, it's been a bit odd to watch our own President Obama, who won perhaps prematurely the Nobel Peace Prize in 2009, now at the end of his term gets so aggressive against Russia in Europe, against China in Asia. And I think what you heard in those talks just now was the two of Russia and China getting together and saying, you know, hang on, maybe we can find common cause here and pushing back a little against the advances of the West.
And how do you think that would manifest itself?
I think in the Middle East, it's going to manifest itself in Russia getting ever more aggressive. And I think in Asia, it's going to manifest itself as Russia supporting China, defending their positions in the Asian theater.
Well, let's bring it back to oil, Charles. Prices have dropped. That has hurt Russia a lot. Russia was China's largest crude oil supplier in May for a third month in a row. It's taken over imports from Saudi Arabia into China. Is this relationship really underpinned by oil? How much impact does it have if the price goes back to normal and if these sanctions are lifted and Russia has more options?
Well, I think, the people who look at economics in the nuts and bolts phase, they'll say that for China to achieve its long-term growth ambitions, it needs to lock in massive energy reserves. So this is a fantastic moment for China to do just that. And it's a good thing for Russia to have a reliable long-term contract, not just from Europe, but now from China and also possibly from India. So I think it's potentially a win-win.
All right. Thanks so much, Charles and Ortel.